Good evening, everyone, and very warm welcome to Estonishing Evenings 11th event entitled Estonian Finland, Common Values and Common Future. Those of you who are here for the first time at the Estonishing Evenings event, we started last year for like-minded Estonians. We all lived abroad at some point in our lives, and we missed international events in Tallinn where both people who have come here from other countries and Estonians can meet and mingle and learn about each other. And that's why we started Estonishing Evenings, and we've touched many different topics: culture, history, working culture, entrepreneurship, religion, even gender equality. And tonight's event is it's quite specific, but I'm glad to see that the room is still full. So it seems that enough people are interested about the relationship between Estonia and Finland. And tonight we have 4 guests here, 4 distinguished guests. And also, when you entered the room, there's quite a lot of things going on. So briefly about that as well. First, there's a little exhibition. It was specifically, those guys put it up for this event. And what it is, if you look closely, it was a project between 50 Estonians and 50 Finnish young people. And they were invited to talk about how they feel about, about each other's countries. Also, you can see there are quite a lot of books around. So the books are for free. If you didn't grab one, you can still take one. The book is in Estonian, so those of you who don't speak in Estonian, time to learn. And one of the authors, Kaja Kunnas, is actually one of our panelists here tonight. So she's here, she's one of the authors behind the book. And I have to say, I haven't actually read this book, but I understand it's about the relationship between Estonia, Finland, and Russia. But maybe Kaja can tell more about that later on. There's another book, quite a few copies there, which is about Helsinki. So those who don't know, we will talk about that as well. Helsinki stands for Tallinn and Helsinki, respective capitals of our countries here. And there's a few copies of Co-Founder magazine on table as well. So Tarmo Virki brought those along. A Co-Founder is about startups, European startups. But I think this issue, I just noticed, there's quite a few articles about Slush. So Slush is the biggest startup conference in the region, and it was organized in Helsinki. And so I'm glad to welcome our first guest tonight, Kristi Raik. She will talk briefly about I don't know exactly actually what you're talking about, but I think we briefed you that we want to give a little overview about common heritage and background and history between Finland and Estonia. There are obviously many different topics that we will discuss later on during our panel. We share linguistic and cultural background, but we share also a lot of history, and also increasingly so lot of economic and business relationship. And we've talked about that, and we will also discuss the future, and we will discuss about values, about Finnish and Nordic values and how much that has impacted Estonia. After Kristi's presentation, we will also take questions from the audience. And after that, we'll have a short break and then continue with the panel. But first, I'm obviously very happy to welcome here Kristi Raik. So Kristi is the director of the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute at the International Center for Defense and Security. And she's also a professor at the University of Turku. Turku is a town in Finland, those of you who don't know. She has previously served also as a senior research fellow and acting program director at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs in Helsinki. And of course, I forgot to mention tonight that my name is Silver Tambor. I'm the moderator tonight. But anyway, first off, Kristi.
So, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. I'm always happy to compare Finland and Estonia. It's one of my favorite topics. I have a long history with both countries. My family, meaning myself and my parents, who are both musicians, music teachers, we moved to Finland in 1990. And that was the time when the borders opened, and to an expert of international politics like myself, the 1990s looks like a very beautiful time. It was a harsh time for Estonia, but it was a time when internationally borders opened and old cleavages were left behind, and there were a lot of new opportunities which also changed the lives of many people, including myself. And actually since that time, since 1990, I have had two homes in Estonia and in Finland, and have learned to know both countries very closely. And when I'm asked, so are Estonia and Finland more similar or more different? It's a bit like, is the glass half empty or half full? Or when you look at it from a short distance, you tend to notice many of the differences. But then again, when you go further away, the similarities are much more clearly visible. When I worked in Brussels for a few years, I actually felt kind of being both an Estonian and a Finn, and noticed that both Estonians and Finns were the ones who, in the EU meetings, opened up their mouth when they actually had something to say, and were not usually the best ones at chit-chat or small talk or kind of promoting themselves, and were known as pragmatic and usually quite constructive people. But I thought that I would start kind of describing more the similarities and differences by telling some anecdotes from my own life. First of all, when I came back to work in Tallinn about 1 year ago, one of my kind of startling experiences was when I rushed into a meeting, and I was crossing the street in the center of Tallinn. It was a quiet moment, no traffic, no cars like moving anywhere near. And I had just crossed the street when the police car drove and stopped right in front of me and asked me to stop and get onto the car. Okay, so what did I do? Apparently I had crossed the street with red lights, and honestly there was no car moving towards me when I was crossing the street. So I was sitting there in the police car and finding really no counter arguments. I just humbly took the invoice and paid the punishment for having broken the traffic rules. And I thought that, okay, wow, I thought that would be something more typical of Finland, you know, kind of taking rules too seriously. But apparently Estonians are also quite serious about following the rules, or at least in some respects. Then another experience was one of the first seminars I was organizing in my new job. And I invited some Estonian speakers, and I was in touch with them almost 2 weeks before the event, and I sent them some topics and some questions that I would like to discuss during the event. And then one of them replied in a friendly manner, and I know that person, that, yeah, okay, thanks, very nice. But you know, we are in Estonia, get used to no longer being in Finland. We think about these questions on the previous night before the seminar. And that's something I have noticed now working in Estonia after several years in Finland, that things often happen more quickly in Estonia. Estonia is kind of more dynamic, and there are good and bad sides about that, but it's something you have to get used to. And of course, it's easy to explain it with the experience that Estonia has had with the transformation after regaining independence, with very rapid reforms and people getting very used to change. Whereas in Finland, the recent history is much more kind of stable, and the structures and institutions that have been established in Finland are quite kind of firmly in place, and it's actually very difficult to change anything. So when something needs to be reformed in Finland, it tends to be more difficult and slower than in Estonia. And then a third story goes back a bit more in history. That was during my first year living in Finland. I was studying in a high school, and that was the time when Estonia was regaining independence in 1991. And I remember very vividly how the Finnish leadership was very cautious and reluctant to kind of publicly support the regaining of independence of Estonia. And I remember talking about it to my new Finnish friends at high school, and I was kind of annoyed about it, and it was very emotional. And I explained my views and expressed my irritation, and what followed was silence. Just complete silence for a while, and then after a while somebody just changed the topic to something completely different. And that kind of told me a couple of things about Finns. One is that Finland, especially back in those times, had quite an ambiguous and cautious attitude towards Estonia. And on the one hand, the Finns were very supportive and in practical ways also trying to help Estonia. And I have to say that many Finns whom I know were sincerely very happy about what was happening in Estonia, the singing revolution and the regaining of independence. But at the same time, at the official level, there was this caution and reluctance really to show the support in public, and definitely not to give the support in a way that could have somehow been harmful to Finland's own foreign policy, and especially Finland's relationship with the Soviet Union, which was about to collapse. But of course Finland was trying to hold on to the old tradition of not annoying the Soviet Union. And another thing that I learned from that episode at high school, which I kind of realized later, is that the discussion culture is different in Estonia and Finland. That Estonians tend to be in a way more straightforward, or not so hesitant to pick up politically sensitive topics and just going straight to the matter and expressing your views. Whereas in Finland there is a very strong consensus culture, which is also, I think, something that you feel in everyday conversations, and especially when you meet people whom you maybe don't know that well, and like at workplace or at a party somewhere or at your friend's place. It's somehow not a good tone to take up controversial political topics, which in Estonia is much more normal thing to do. So in that sense, the cultures are a bit different. And then talking about culture, one thing that I would like to raise is the differences between values. And this is something that where Estonia wishes to portray itself as a Nordic country, as close to the Nordics, close to Finland. But actually, when we look at value systems, there is evidence from opinion surveys showing some very clear differences, which I personally have also experienced. And one of the sources is called the World Values Survey. When you look at the data, there is one block of values called self-expression values, which includes things such as kind of tolerance, openness to different views. It also covers attitudes towards gender equality, social justice, and it covers kind of attitude towards political activeness and kind of people's belief that as a citizen you can make a difference or you can have an influence on political decision making or on what happens in society. So this is something where the Baltic states and the Nordic states are actually very clearly different, and where I would say Estonians are not as Nordic as we sometimes kind of claim to be. And I think this is one aspect where we can see still somehow the impact of the long period of occupation, living in a totalitarian country, not kind of growing up with the experience of what it means to live in an open society, and what kind of opportunities you can have as a citizen. Maybe this is something that will change over generation, but for my generation, I think the difference is there. Then let me also say a few words on my actual topic that I work on every day, which is foreign policy, foreign and security policy. That is an area where Estonia and Finland have been moving closer together. And I would say even that in recent years, Finland in some important respects has been moving closer to Estonia. And some of my Finnish colleagues don't like this way of formulating what has happened, but let me explain what I mean. The change has been visible since the Ukraine crisis broke out, like after the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and then after the Russian supported and instigated war in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine. So what has happened with the Finnish foreign policy since then is that Finland has become more openly critical towards Russia. There is still a very clear difference between the Estonian and Finnish public debate on Russia. It's still much more, let's say, normal in Estonia to be very strongly critical and very vocal about anything almost related to Russia, whereas the Finns are still much more cautious, and especially at the official level. But what is something quite new in the Finnish foreign policy is that Finland is actually part of a European Union policy which condemns Russia's actions against Ukraine. And Finland has been very consistent with that position, supporting the sanctions against Russia, taking the position that this is actually something that is also harmful for Finland's national interest. And it has not been an easy change. I was working at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs when these things happened, annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. And I was commenting these topics a lot in the Finnish media. And my comments would have been something very modest in the Estonian context. But in the Finnish context, it was something more extraordinary, that someone was saying out things so straightforward that we are seeing Russia doing very nasty things and we have to condemn it. And the debate was really very lively in Finland back then. And I would say the Finnish debate on Russia has changed quite a lot than in recent years. It has become more normal to have a critical debate on Russia, and the generational difference is very clear. I think still we can see that the older generation of Finnish politicians tend to have still the reflexes that it's better not to say out things loud. But with the younger generation, it's quite different. And then another thing which has changed in the Finnish policy is that Finland has actually engaged in very close security and defense policy cooperation with the West, including Sweden, first of all, the closest neighbor, but also the US, the UK, NATO, really very practical, very close defense cooperation. And the way Finland has done it has been kind of not really making a big fuss about it, stressing the continuity of security policy, kind of claiming that, you know, the long policy tradition has not changed, but actually kind of slowly shifting, so that kind of hoping that no one really notices, but actually moving closer and closer to the Western structures. Which I think for security in our region is good news, that we cooperate more closely on security and defense. Well, as I said, the Russia debate is quite different still, comparing Estonia and Finland. And it's also an area where I think Estonians tend to misunderstand Finland, or don't quite realize how complex and how multi-layered the Finnish policy and relationship with Russia is. In the case of Estonia, I think it's kind of more straightforward and clear that Estonia has joined all the possible Western structures, and no one has any hesitation to say out what the threat perceptions are and what the concerns are. But in the case of Finland, there is this very nuanced game of, on the one level, trying to maintain a good bilateral relationship with Russia, also trying to maintain political dialogue with Russia, in spite of all the difficulties and problems in the relationship, and especially in the broader Russian-Western relationship. And there is a degree of kind of pretending to have good relations in it. Finland kind of claims that the relationship is good because, of course, Finland always wants to have good relations with Russia. And by practicing this diplomatic talk and dialogue, it kind of tries to actually make the relations better. And this is something that Estonians find kind of difficult to understand. And I would say there is a broader problem here in the way Europeans manage their relationship with Russia, which obviously is a very difficult neighbor nowadays. But when you listen to the European discussions, I mean, among the EU member states on how to deal with Russia, then very often having dialogue with Russia is seen as something like a concession. And then you have these Estonians who are very tough and hardline and kind of think that, oh, we don't like what Russia is doing, so let's not talk to them. And then there are other more Russia-friendly countries or politicians who say that we should have better relations with Russia, we should have more dialogue and not sanctions, and kind of suggesting that dialogue is something that is already a concession or something that you do if you believe that you can have good relationship. But this is not really what diplomacy is about. I mean, diplomacy at its best is actually an effort to solve difficulties, or at least to try to have a dialogue even when the circumstances are very difficult. And having a dialogue doesn't mean that that's already a concession. And here I would say Finland is quite skillful in playing this multi-layered game of trying to have dialogue in very difficult circumstances, and at the same time being very clear on the red lines and the national interests that Finland is defending, and also being very consistent in maintaining a strong national defense capability without making a big fuss about it. But this is really something that you can see very continuously looking at the Finnish history and dating back a long way. Something that is a very important part of the Finnish foreign policy identity is the Winter War. When you start discussing Russia relations with the Finn, you always at some point end up discussing the Winter War and how the Finns fought. And it's actually something that has shaped and still shapes today the attitude of Russia towards Finland. And here, of course, Estonia has a very different background, and I don't think, I would not suggest that Estonia could have the same kind of relationships, the same kind of dialogue with Russia as Finland does. But I would kind of advocate myself a more nuanced attitude to dialogue, and the realization that talking to your difficult neighbor doesn't mean that it's a concession. I don't think the Russian president thinks that it's a punishment if Estonians say that we don't talk to you. I don't think he cares that much. So, is it time for questions now?
I think so, yeah. So we will take some questions as well. Just raise your hands and our team member will come to you. But just quickly, Finland actually celebrated its Independence Day on the 6th of December last week. And yes, applause to that. I should have started with mentioning that. That's part of the reason actually why we decided to have this event in December dedicated to Finland and Estonia, because Finnish Independence Day. And Kristi obviously works in a foreign with foreign policy and in foreign policy. She could probably talk about hours about those relationships. And she did write an article about that, where you actually did say that Estonia could learn from Finland thing or two about how to, talk to Russia. And so it's an interesting article, yeah. And it seems that not many many Estonian politicians agree with you. It's not really a mainstream here, but we don't want to obviously get stuck too much in the past. In the panel, we will bring more down to the sort of human level and maybe just talk about how that past has influenced the present. But we will try to more focus on the future and visions. But it's interesting history. But also quickly, how many of you are actually Finnish? So, and not that many, but few ones. And how many are Estonians? So, and the rest are from the rest of the world, then I guess. I don't know if everyone knows the history in terms of how Finland always maintained its independence. Does everyone knows that? Seems that raise your hand if no. We can just give you a quick brief, but otherwise, we're not gonna want to. You want to know? Do you want to say quickly, how what happened between, that Finland remained independent, Estonia didn't, or shall I go through?
Well, sure, yes.
Just with few.
Yes, indeed. Well, Finland celebrated 101 years of independence, and Finland has actually been independent throughout these 101 years. It had to defend its independence by fighting a couple of wars, and the plan of Stalin, the Soviet leader, during the Second World War and after, was to make Finland also part of the Eastern Bloc, but he failed, which is quite a miracle. So I think Finns can be proud about that.
Obviously,
and what happened to Estonia, you probably know that Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union and then regained independence in 1991.
Yes, but okay, questions? Yep. Just briefly introduce yourself as well and try to be as specific as possible.
So I'm Chris Polmans, I'm from the Netherlands, and I often come to Estonia, and I also show actually groups around in Estonia about why it's so beautiful, why thanks to the culture they are so digitally innovative. But you were mentioning about the diplomatics with Russia, but I also hear many experts on Russia saying like, to keep reaching out a hand to Putin, it doesn't really work. Like as far as I remember, if I remember correctly, even Bush said that the whole symbolic thing which they did with the button, like you're starting all over and you can join NATO and everything, that is just actually a big mistake to keep involving him, because he can just get away with everything as long as he knows, like, yeah, nobody's gonna care anyway, and they're giving me a second chance, and they just keep talking. What's your view on that other perspective?
Yeah, well, thanks. When you look at the US recent history of dealing with Russia, actually the most interesting and meaningful dialogue that you had was during the time when the Soviet Union was moving towards collapse. And you had President Reagan first and then President Bush Sr. actually engaging in dialogue and finding ways to end the Cold War. And it happened without any major violence, which was quite an achievement. And it happened, I would say, a lot also thanks to this skillful diplomacy. Of course, there are many explanations, also the personalities and the personality of Gorbachev, who was the last leader of the Soviet Union. But my point here is that having a dialogue, I mean, just the fact of dialogue is an instrument. It doesn't really say anything about the substance of the positions. And it also doesn't say anything about whether you back up the dialogue with sanctions or military force. That's something we should have learned from the relationship with Russia, that you shouldn't be naive about dialogue alone solving the problems. You actually have to be able to defend yourself. You have to be able to do something also other than talking when you think that Russia has done something you can't accept. And this is something we are seeing again today, that the conflict has escalated in the Azov Sea, the Kerch Strait, but the Europeans are too busy trying to solve their own political problems, and they don't really have too much time to think about how to make also Russia carry some costs for behaving aggressively. So they are kind of getting away with it.
That's also the point. What Europe is seeing now, what they're saying is, we do a lot of cold, soft power through dialogue, but cold power, soft power without hard power is no power. If you only keep talking and you don't have any way to enforce it for like a military, then you really have no power in the dialogue as well, in the negotiation.
Sure. Well, that's one of the Finnish lessons, that you maintain your hard power also to defend yourself.
Kristi wrote as well about that in the article. You can find it in English at Diplomatia, which is the magazine, but also Estonian World republished your article. And what Kristi said in the article was that Finland is kind of friendly with Russia, but at the same time it's well defended. Was that briefly the point? And it is well defended. They have a very large air force. Estonia's got 0 jets. Finland's got 50, I think, if I'm correct. So, but yeah. Anyway, question there.
Thank you very much for the speech. I had a question. How do you see the issue of the decreasing Finnish language skills in Estonia, which used to be the backbone of the entire relation between the two countries?
Well, I didn't think of it as a problem, to be honest. I think the younger generation of Finns knows English very well, and the same goes for the younger generation of Estonians. I don't think nowadays you can expect Estonians to maintain the same kind of level of knowledge of Finnish language as during the Soviet period, when there was this very specific reason for that. If not everyone is familiar with this past, at least in the northern part of Estonia, people watched a lot the Finnish TV, and that was like the window to the West, and many Estonians of my generation learned Finnish from that.
Those Estonians who lived in the north of Estonia.
Northern part of Estonia,
I come from the south part, and I didn't have Finnish TV, so my Finnish is not very good, unfortunately. But I remember when we visited our relatives in Tallinn, then obviously we did, and that was a window to the west for Estonians. So just question there.
Yes, I'm actually a Finnish teacher at the Estonian school, and 10% of our students are studying Finnish. That's an optional course at 10%. So we have 250 students in our school, and 25 I have on my course Finnish. So it is possible to learn Finnish also nowadays in Estonia.
Follow up to the question, to the subject of the relations also in terms of soft and hard power. What do you think is going to happen to Europe with the continentalization, with Brexit? Do you think Europe is going to become even weaker in confronting Russia, or in understanding how to deal with Russia, because of the lack of the pragmatism and the ability to manage in a very effective, and probably more effective than the German way, power in a way that can actually yield some diplomatic results, positive diplomatic results?
Thanks. That's a concern, of course, that Brexit changes the balance within the EU. I mean, it's not a secret that there are member states that tend to be more Russia friendly or too understanding towards Putin's policies, and then there are others who are more firm. And the UK was always in the camp of being more principled and firm. And now it is on its way out and absorbed by its internal problems. And another little bit of a question mark is also the future direction of Germany. Well, after the election of the new leader of the CDU party in Germany, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, I have practiced that. There is quite a good degree of continuity in German politics, and apparently Angela Merkel will stay on actually as a leader for some time to go, but the domestic political dynamics is such that there is some more fragmentation also in Germany, and it's not so clear where the foreign policy of Germany will be heading in future. And so far we don't really know anything about what Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer thinks about foreign policy matters. I hope she will learn a lot from Merkel. But Merkel was a politician coming from Eastern Germany, having a very good knowledge of Russia, a very good understanding of the concerns in the eastern part of Europe, also a very clear understanding about the importance of the transatlantic relationship and about the need to be firm with Russia on major violations of international law that we have seen in recent years. So will all this continue? It looks less certain today than a couple of years ago.
Okay, but Brexit is not the topic of tonight,
Changing the
nor
topic.
is Russia actually. So, but unless your question is about Finland, yeah, that's good. Okay, let's ask something of Finland. No more Russia at the moment, or Brexit.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask about what you said, that Finland really cares for relations with Russia. So I was wondering, just why? I mean, why is it so important for Finns to have such good relations with this country? Just very short answer, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a big neighbor. I mean, whatever question is raised about Finland's relationship with Russia, usually someone tells about how long border there is between Finland and Russia, but it kind of doesn't really directly explain, I think, any specific type of policy. But of course, it's always better to be in good terms with your neighbors than to be on bad terms. But here we also have to go back in history to the Cold War era. As I mentioned before, Finland managed to maintain its independence, contrary to the plans of the Soviet Union. But at the same time, it made a huge effort to build up a good relationship and to stress that Russia can trust Finland, that Russia does not have to be concerned about anything negative coming from the Finnish side, and kind of trying to build up a relationship that then helps to alleviate political tensions, and then using also the economic ties as a way to somehow try to reduce political tensions.
Just briefly, they won what was called Winter War, but they lost chunk of Finland to Soviet Union, and still it's part of Russia now. So it's, you know, even though they won. But I think that's it. We will have a discussion later on, a panel, and we'll take more questions. So thank you, Kristi.
Thank
you. Warm welcome. And for the audience, we have a questions for you. So if we can get that on the screen, I'll explain briefly. Okay, so this is a question for everyone now. How similar are Estonians and Finns to each other from scale of 1 to 10? And I'll explain how you can vote. On your tables, you can see the glass surface and you can see the buttons. If you move those buttons up, you can rate up to the 10 on a scale 1 to 10. If it's down, it's 1, in the middle it's 5, and so forth. And eventually, the computer will automatically calculate the average score. So just decide how you want to vote on that. Just a few minutes. Okay, so the average score is about 5.6, so roughly about. So it seems that we're not that similar then, Estonians and Finns. I would have expected that score to be higher, to be honest, myself. But there you go. This is your decision. So we'll have a break now, about 10 minutes. Grab yourself a drink, and then we'll continue with the panel. Tarmo Virki, Kaja Kunnas, Timo Raussi, and Kristi Räike. So welcome back. We feel like we are in a studio actually, but let's start. Anyway, I'm happy to introduce our panel. I already introduced Kristi, but let's start with Kaja now. Ladies first. So Kaja Kunnas is a Finnish Estonian journalist who lives and works in Tallinn. She writes for Helsingin Sanomat. Those who don't know, this is the largest newspaper in Finland. Am I right?
Yes.
Right. And
second largest in the world, right? Or third largest?
it's actually very large. Yeah. It's I think it's
still Scandinavia. Yes.
yeah, its circulation is I think it's about 600,000 or something like that, which in this day and age is a big number. And Finland is it's bigger than Estonia, but it's still a small country by global standards.
Not 600.
And Tarmo Virki, Tarmo says that he embodies Finland and Estonia. He was born in Estonia but educated in Finland, where he also started his career. After working for Reuters in Helsinki for many years, he returned to Estonia 7 years ago and currently lives in Saaremaa Island, where he develops and runs the Lahendage beverage company. Basically, it's a gin, as I understand.
Gin, we make both gin and tonic.
Right, gin and tonic. And he also publishes the Co-Founder magazine, which is pan-European startup magazine. So it's published from Saaremaa Island. And
Yes.
and Timo Raussi is a PR and marketing consultant, a translator, and an ex-journalist, a former journalist who moved from Helsinki to Tallinn in 2004. Having been interested in interaction of the two countries and enterprises operating in them, as well as the economic, cultural, and political development of Estonian society, Timo has acted, for example, as a board member of the Finnish Estonian Chamber of Commerce, and also you've been involved with many other companies, I understand. And currently developing...
Currently I'm in between jobs,
Right.
looking for new challenges, but working as a freelance translator, and therefore, and working, for example, with quite closely with the tourism sector. I've been cooperating with the Estonian Tourism Board for almost 10 years now, I guess, contributing and editing a little bit the messages that Estonia communicates to Finnish tourists.
So we have two Finns and two Estonians here. Although Kaja, probably you could say that you're sort of Finnish Estonian or Estonian Finnish. Which way you say?
Yes, I'm born in Finland. My father spoke Estonian with me, but my grandfather moved from Estonia to Finland. And I have been traveling between Estonia and Finland starting when I was 4 years old.
Yeah, so a long time.
And I have also already applied for the Estonian citizenship.
Okay. So we've got many topics. We'll try to discuss as many as possible. We'll try to discuss also Helsinki area and the sort of common economic area, but also tourism even, if you have time. But let's start with a question. What do you think? Who is more introverted and socially awkward, Finns or Estonians?
I mean, Finns, of course.
Finns.
Yep, agreed.
I would say both are introvert and both are awkward, but awkward in a different way. I mean, I told my example of how, when an Estonia tells something that is kind of maybe provocative and too straightforward, going into some political topics, that is awkward for many people, not just in Finland, but also in other European countries. Finns wouldn't do something like that quite so often, so they are awkward in a different way.
I think during my years as a journalist in Finland, my middle name was Blunt.
Blunt. Okay, interesting. Kaja, what do you think?
Okay, this is something that unites Finnish and Estonian people and makes it easier to communicate with each other. But maybe Estonians can be silent much longer than Finns. That they can stay in the lift. It's no problem to be in the lift with Estonians and saying no word. and it's normal. And even in the mass, if you are in a ground, for example, in Estonian Independence Day, you are with thousands of people there in the same hill, Toompea, and they are all singing and having fun, and then comes the moment when everyone is silent, and Estonians stand more being silent, even more than Finns.
Who do you think smiles more? I mean, Finns or Estonians? They say the Estonians are very serious, but I think it's changing. The younger people, the Estonian generation, to more and more basically like the Western counterparts. But when I went to Helsinki first time, I remember I thought Finns were smiling more often than Estonians. Am I wrong?
No, you're not, because quite recently there was a story in the media even that why are Finns not feeling themselves welcomed in Estonia anymore. It's not only about the language issue, it's also about the service culture. And even Estonian online commentators were commenting that when they go to Finland, personnel in restaurants, in shops, in kiosks, smile at you and say hello to you. But when you come to Estonia and you go to the shopping center and in a boutique, the salesperson only is in Facebook behind the counter and doesn't even bother that do you want to buy something or not. And the same goes into the restaurants. I haven't felt that so much because as a bit different type of Finn, bit more extrovert Finn, I guess, as general. I've always came to Estonia, tried to localize myself, tried to be more open, try to say, and besides, I disagree with you. Estonians, there is a rule that if you are living in an apartment house and you walk down the stairs, you must say tere to everybody who comes towards you. But in Finland, you just go past and in a silent way.
You must say tere, but you will never know who they are. They will never introduce you.
That's common in both countries.
Well, maybe we lived in different parts of Finland, because I have been used to saying hey to all the Finns I meet in the houses where I have lived.
But do you get reply?
Maybe that's because I'm Estonian, so I thought I'm supposed to do it. I don't know.
And they were all looking at you weirdly, right?
Yeah.
Probably that's why.
But how has it changed? I mean, the audience also, they gave the verdict, and it wasn't that high. I expected that average score to be higher. It was 5.6 or something, the question of similarities. But is it fair to say that in the last 27 years, since Estonia regained its independence, that Estonians have become more and more similar to Finns? Would that be fair to say or not? In terms of at least some kind of approach to life, and maybe not in terms of values. That's another question we can discuss. But
from our table, Tarmo gave the lowest score, so you have to answer.
No, but I think on the rating thing, my score was the lowest. But my explanation was that people at our table actually were the ones who were have looked it from the most deeper end. And if you are really deep, most of us have lived half of life in another country or partly here and there. You see much more similarities. As I was saying, if you come from Australia and look at Finland and Estonia, they look the same. They talk the same. They are the same.
They have the same nasty climate even, especially in November, December. It's dark, it rains, it's awful. Don't come here.
True.
I mean, both have obviously, in some ways, very similar background. Finno-Ugric. Also, again, briefly, those who don't know, we share our languages are very similar. They share the same sort of common roots. We also both like sauna, things like that. Again, Finns, Estonians sort of argue who invented Finns probably did, right? Am I right here? But what would you say is the common value system? What do we have in common? And where, I mean, Kristi, you already touched that subject briefly in your presentation, but where do you think Estonians could catch up or learn from Finns in terms of value system?
Well, what I mentioned was the so-called self-expression values. Well, that's the social scientists' kind of label for a bunch of different things. But these values that go under that label, one thing that they contribute to is social cohesion. And I also talked about the Finnish consensus culture, which is sometimes very annoying, that it's a norm in Finland that somehow when people talk, you try to reach at consensus. And I have at least experienced it at my workplace and during my studies, that when you have a group of people coming together, somehow the idea is that you should strive to agree and to have a consensus.
But of course, looking from Finland, they look at the Swedes, who are the consensus nation, to the extreme, right?
The Swedes have, the
Even
stereotype
worse.
is that they spend much more time talking. That
reaching the
Finland
consensus.
is still a bit more straightforward than in terms of like workplace culture. If something has to be decided, it can be said by the boss that this is the way we do it. Whereas Swedes would first spend 2 hours discussing and then...
But today's common values, I think the kind of common roots are some Protestant work ethic things where we have a lot of similarities, especially if you look from the far away.
There aren't so many, because I was thinking that the two main differences is that where Finns have had, so to say, social democrats in power almost the 1960s, 70s, 80s, a long period of time, the social values have always been based on let's do this together, let's strive for the common goals. Whereas Estonia, gaining the independence in '91, being only 27-year-old nation, so to say, the era of cowboy capitalism, everybody fight for yourself, was quite a long period, almost through all the 90s and beginning of 2000 even. And I feel still, having been working in different Estonian enterprises, I still feel that everybody fights for themselves and themselves only. They don't have the common, we are workers of a company and we pull together.
But I think this we thing is on a different level. We don't have the social democratic unions the Finns
Trade
are part
unions.
of. I think that's the thing which there's the difference. But we have this we attitude, let's say at the local village level, let's go and clean the beach, or things like that.
That's true.
Yes, and I think that the values have get closer and closer during the decades. So they are changing slowly, and because when I was in Tartu studying, it was 1990, and then I remember that many of my friends, women, they said that their ideal is to be at home and have a big family or something like that, and not to speak about politics. They were all studying at Tartu University. And I don't think they now remember even that, because they are career women, all of them. But it was somehow that looking back to the 30s and having speaking of this kind of ideals. And I thought that they are serious, but now I see that it wasn't that actually. It was just once having the same style or same kind of continuity of the state meant that also the young people were looking back. It was some kind of a style or to look back to the 30s and for a while be and think of those values and then go forward. And now I'm very optimistic that although we can see all kind of demonstrations which we look like backwards, but still I have seen such a big change, and for me as a woman it's much easier all the time to be here, because in 90s I saw that this is a state for the young men. They had huge opportunities, and they were all also very self-conscious and trusting themselves.
Do you think Finland has played a role here as well? You know, how much has it actually impacted in Estonia in terms of, you know, importing those sort of different mindset and different values you just mentioned?
I think
I know it's probably difficult to evaluate that,
yeah.
But do you think it has played?
I think it's a normal process being part of the open Western world.
To get more information is to get more knowledge, is to understand other people better or to accept them. That is true. What you mentioned, that there is the cohesion. I just read an article that most of you must know the abbreviation LBGT. Lesbians, bisexuals, gays and transsexuals. In Finland, the Pride parade has been organized since when? 20 years or something like that. In Estonia,
30 years.
Even. In Estonia, there was two Pride parades in 2003 and 2004. And then there was over 10-year pause. Nothing happened because nobody were brave enough to organize it. Last year it was organized for the first time, and the organizers admitted in a media interview that they were quite afraid of what the reaction would be, and they were surprised how easily it did actually go. No violence, no even bad talks, no verbal abuse.
Well, this is, I think, where really the Soviet past plays its role. We had a different event actually focusing on diversity, and clearly the surveys show that when it comes to attitudes towards, you know, sexual minorities, Estonians are more similar with Russians when it comes to that. You know, they're very different from the Nordic value system. So that's definitely one area where, you know, there is big gap still.
But it's also an age issue, because the generation of me and Tarmo, we have the different values than the younger ones at the moment have.
But that may take a long time to change here, many things. But talking about social cohesion, I'm not sure if everyone saw, but we also shared an article on our event page that the news that Finland was proclaimed the happiest country on earth just earlier this year, and Estonia was number 63. And so, I mean, many people actually were surprised also that Finland was number 1. But of course, many people also said that Estonia shouldn't be 63, that it's not as bad, you know. But talking about Finland, I mean, Jeremy Clarkson, the British Top Gear host, said that how come Finland can be number 1? That, you know what, the only time he visited Finland, he visited bar and everyone looked at him like as if they wanted to kill him or something, you know. So he said they didn't look like happy people. But what's your take on that? But I think that's the trick here, social cohesion. Because if you look at how they actually measured that happiness, there are many different factors. It's not that, you know, how much you smile or whatever, you know, how often do you laugh. It's about how happy are you generally in your life, and indeed the social cohesion played an important role, you know. How supportive is the society? Is
how secure you can feel about your own life?
Yeah.
So basically, smiling, happiness, and laughing were not measured at all by any metrics, and the result was the happiest nation.
So, but I mean, what do you think Estonia number 63? I mean, what do we need to do? Just look at how Finland has done things, or what?
I mean, we should not look at that statistics.
Okay, yeah. Because in is there something that Finns could learn from Estonia on the other side of the coin?
Definitely there is. Two of the reasons why I moved to Estonia in 2004 was, first of all, I was absolutely fed up with the semi-manufactured food products. You stick in the microwave lunch, that was normal reality in Finland. In here you got from fresh vegetables, meats, homemade, home-cooked food. For me it was a really going back to the childhood and a kind of nostalgia, but also paying respect to what do you do and from what kind of products. And the other thing is, I came a little bit after the, so to say, uphill Estonian society was gaining. The GDP was double-digit numbers year after year after year. Everybody was buying new cars, everybody was buying new houses, okay, with bank loans, but still. I came when Estonia was already on the top, and then started slightly to go downwards. But I still felt that the atmosphere in workplace, in your social life, was more free, more relaxed. You didn't have to press so hard to cope. And the Estonian people did have they really did have different values. They had free time activities, they had volunteer work, everybody was working in 2 different jobs, having themselves in 3 different hobbies and so. And one of them is singing. The Estonian Sing Festival has 150 years of history, and every Estonian belongs to a choir or folk dancing group, at least so it seems to me. And that is a good stress reliever. So I suggest everybody get into the choirs. You will be much happier after that.
Good. There's a Finnish concept called sisu. It comes from Finnish word, right? I mean, you're Finnish. You're probably better than me to explain what it stands for. My question is actually, because if I look at those characteristics, what sisu means. Okay, I'll read. It's a Finnish concept described as a stoic determination, tenacity of purpose, grit, bravery, resilience, and hardiness, and is held by Finns themselves to express their national character. But that's quite similar to Estonian character, is it not?
It's not.
It's not. Why?
It's not. Again, we have to learn from the history and learn from the Winter War, I would say. Sisu really means persistence, but it also means that you actually deliver what you promise. And in that sense, Finns were able to do that because they were willing to go through the hard place just to keep their homeland secure, just to protect their homes. If we look even nowadays, the statistics of how many Finns do have the defense force that you have to go through between the age of 19 to 29, I guess, the basic military training. You do that voluntarily. You think that you have to do it, and you are willing to do it. Estonians still try to avoid to getting into the military service, at least part of the youngsters. In Finland, you do drop out from the basic course because of lack of health. Nobody does the sports, everybody's doing e-sports, playing video games, that is. So there are dropouts in Finnish military force as well. But Estonians don't like to even start the training. At least bigger share of the youngsters.
But I think you are mixing too much now the concept of sisu with national defense. I mean, that's one place where you can maybe see the Finnish sisu materializing, that the will to defend the country is very strong, and it's historically proven that it's strong. But I would still claim that Estonians do have the same kind of sisu. It maybe is kind of visible in different kind of things, but when an Estonian decides to build a house, let's say, then, you know, he does it.
They will also deliver, yeah. I was just about to say, Timo, are you suggesting the Estonians don't deliver?
I do. Because if you promise to yourself that I will buy the house, I will build the house, you will do it. If you promise to your friend that I will help you building the house, you break the promise. Sorry to say that, but you can't trust Estonian person's word as much as you can trust Finnish person's word. That is...
You've clearly had some bad
You
experiences.
had bad friends.
But Estonians speak up, you know.
Silver, actually one...
Or boo down.
One really lovely contrast to this concept of nation, or how to describe the nation. Jan Gross has described it as the Estonian nation's key characteristic as a bright cynic. Right. And that's clearly something you wouldn't probably use as the most common words for Finns, right?
Yeah.
At least not the cynic. They might be bright, but...
True.
Kaja, have you got anything to add to this?
I think maybe Estonians, this kind of sisu we could see 10 years ago when there was economic depression, and somehow it was astonishing how Estonians who lost their works, they just went to Finland, those low-level people who couldn't know the language, they didn't know the language, they didn't have contacts there, but they went there and they found work, even when there was also depression in Finland. And then in the same way here in Estonia, how Estonians in their everyday life try to manage. If they lose their job, they find another one, and if they get too low wages, then they too find another job, and somehow managing all the time, or it's also some kind of sisu. And all the nation being ready for that 10% of their salaries were cut because of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, the Finnish depression of 2008 actually meant that the house prices did not go up.
Okay. But anyway, there was unemployment in Finland. There was unemployment in Finland, Finns without work, but still they could come. And I know many examples who just come to Finland who haven't been highly educated, but who have this kind of sisu, or what kind of, that they just decide to find that they will find their work very quickly through social media and social contacts through other Estonians.
But where both countries rank high are PISA tests. So PISA tests, which they evaluate the skills of 15-year-olds, if I'm correct. And Estonia, I think, was first in Europe and third globally. And Finland is just somewhere just after Estonia. What do you, I know you're not working in education, I think, but in your experience, what could we learn from each other in terms of education? And is there something Estonians could learn from Finland? Or I think looking at PISA tests, they're both doing well, obviously.
I think on education level, there's a lot we could teach the world.
Right. Both of them.
Exactly, together. Yeah. I think there's a lot of kind of international collaboration opportunities. We were earlier talking about, for example, the Finnish education accelerator called Exedu, where I was pitching to you earlier, one Estonian team has moved its educational company to Finland. And I haven't really heard lately of any Estonian companies moving to Finland. It just makes no sense.
Well, that actually does bring us to, let's talk a little bit about politics and economy as well. But first, I actually wanted to ask you if you compared political culture in both countries, how different or similar are the political cultures? Again, probably Finland, as it's been independent for so many years, it probably wins here. But is there something we could learn from Finland in terms of political culture?
Well, I spoke about the consensus culture already, but it's not only a positive thing. I also have to say that of course, it's a skill to have this habit of going through negotiations, and when you are determined to end up with a common position and agreement, you kind of do that, and when there is this experience and political culture, it kind of becomes a habit. And that's something where Estonia, I would say, is weaker. The politics is more conflictual. But then the negative side of this consensus politics is that it may tend to become too kind of difficult to change anything or to have substantial arguments and to come forward with some new ideas. If everyone just thinks about reaching the consensus, then it does not really encourage, I would say, innovative thinking so much.
What about political correctness? Would you say that Finland is more politically correct or not? I mean, I'm not saying Estonia is, it's not too bad, I guess. I mean, we got few politicians who say that, women shouldn't talk and things like that, but
they still run the country,
yeah.
those politicians.
And they're still very popular, right? But it's not too bad compared to some, there are worse examples, but obviously it can be, It's getting, I guess in Estonia we have one party that is maybe stirring up things, the far right extra party. But then again, Finland also had its, far right and stuff like that. I mean,
I think here we have to actually look at the broader trends in Western politics, and we were talking earlier about the generational difference and how Estonians are also becoming more tolerant towards different minorities and kind of accepting differences. But then what is happening more broadly in the Western political culture is more polarization. That you have this group of people who are tolerant and very kind of open-minded and seeing international contacts as something positive and kind of thinking in cosmopolitan terms as world citizens. But then you also have the other extreme, which is actually nowadays more and more vocal in expressing completely opposite views and wishing to close borders and just stick to yourself and increase protectionism and kind of defend your very narrowly defined identity. And this is something that is kind of making Estonia and Finland more similar, because we see in both countries exactly the same type of radical right-wing populist parties becoming more popular, and the clashes between different groups within society increasing.
But maybe one of the main differences is that in Estonia actually there is not any leftist parties. That Estonian, we have the same parties, have the same names, but Estonian Social Democrats and Centre Party are like Finnish Kokoomus or Conservatives.
I think
there is
nobody
like no party who is now having, for example, progressive tax system. This is not a theme, or yes. So
that is true, yeah, and I mean the general image about anything left-wing in Estonia is all, it's very low.
We use the same words,
yeah.
but they mean different things in politics.
I think on the treatment of the far right, actually I think Estonian political system could learn a lot from Finland. Because perussuomalaiset, whatever, 5-10 years ago, looked like rather extreme group. They were this idiot boxer, or what's the guy running it who tried to shoot himself and failed. I think basically taking...
Talking about awkward Finns.
Exactly. No, they are the happiest nation on in the world, as you know. But the fact that, they took this weird party into the government, gave them power, basically their support melted. They're still in the government, but they don't really run the kind of in similar level like in Estonia. They're kind of polarizing.
They were not given the chance to run the government because everybody who had been in power so years and years saw that they were incompetent, and they are incompetent.
Same case here, right?
I wouldn't take any sides, but I would hope so.
But okay, we've got many questions to discuss. Let's move to business and economy, actually. Tarmo, obviously you run a magazine about entrepreneurship and you worked also for Reuters in Helsinki. How, and I'm sure here in the audience there are some entrepreneurs who might think to maybe do business, conduct business in Finland. How easy or difficult is it for Estonian entrepreneurs to actually enter the Finnish market, which is still, it's 5 million, Estonia is 1.3 million, so Finnish market could be quite attractive.
This kind of entering it from nothing, not speaking a word and not having contacts, impossible. At the same time, if you're in the same situation comparing Finland and Russia, Finland is much easier. I mean, or Finland and any Arab countries or whatever. I mean, Finland is much easier. They think a bit similarly, as we started off that, if Finn sends you an email, it's a deal, they will pay their bill eventually. If, somebody from Dubai sends you an email, it's a deal, you have to go through 1 year of negotiations about the details of the deal. So I think in general, yes, of course, it's much easier. In practice, it really depends.
Would you say, Timo, that it's easier for Finns in Estonia?
Well, the structure of running businesses has been so different so different. It is true that the Finnish investments in Estonia have been year after year second biggest of all foreign countries. Swedes, because of their financial institutions, are the biggest foreign investor in Estonia. Finns are the second biggest, representing approximately 15% of all foreign investments. Running the business in Estonia is not that easy coming from Finland, because you have different kind of working culture, you have different kind of management that you need to supervise, and so mainly the Finnish companies have entered the Estonian markets by sending expats here, and then their mission has been to find skillful Estonian management to run the units, and so that they could go back to Finland, to the headquarters. And it has been working nicely. The challenge is that I would say that Estonian enterprises have at least the last 10 years have been taught to think born global. If you want to sell your products or your services to the world, if you are an export-oriented company, think globally, directly. Then you can manage with English language. If you are running your business model on a retailer or vendor-based, then you might want to enter one market area to run a test, so to say. And in that sense, Finland is a good test territory, because, like Tarmo said, there are cultural similarities and ways of running business are similar. So it depends on where you're coming from.
Well, again, briefly, I don't know if everyone knows, but there is a vision. It's called Helsinki. It's been around for many years, and the idea is that because Helsinki and Tallinn are very close to each other, 80 kilometers, 50 miles, it could form potentially as a sort of one common economic area. And many probably you have already heard, but a Finnish businessman, Peter Vesterbacka, has proposed to build a tunnel between Helsinki and Tallinn. So you would be able to travel by car in 20 minutes between those two cities. And I mean, that could ideally form, one Bay Area, he calls it. So what's your take on that? Do you believe in that? I mean, he's very optimistic. He's already, I think, started selling tickets to the tunnel, yes, and it's supposed to be ready by 2024.
I'm sure we have in the audience some people who have bought tickets. No?
Has anyone bought ticket to Helsinki-Tallinn tunnel already?
No?
No, not yet.
In fact, there are two competing tunnel plans.
Right.
One is the project that has applied for EU funding, and it's like a longer term vision. And then the other one is what Vesterbacka is doing, and trying to attract Chinese funding.
And then again now found the first funding from Dubai.
And yes, exactly, now it has moved on. But I have to say that I feel slightly suspicious about the latter project. Also because of kind of geopolitical reasons. When we look at what is going on in global politics, how different authoritarian big powers are trying to gain political influence by investing big sums of money. We can see it in different Eastern European countries.
And African countries a lot.
And of course, yes, in other parts of the world. It's not that attractive example. I think we have to be very careful about what we wish for, or what kind of dependencies we want to have on money that comes from somewhere far away from a political system which is very different from ours.
So you're talking about Chinese money, basically.
Sure.
Yeah,
yes.
Chinese money. Yeah. Anyone from China in the audience?
You want to have a word?
Usually we have, but yeah. So maybe you want to comment on that later. Right? Should people be afraid of Chinese investment?
Of you.
No, but you
No,
can't
not of you. Chinese money.
And you can't generalize here. It's not a question of being afraid of any Chinese investment, but especially when it's about big infrastructure projects, sectors that are strategically important for security, for like security of supplies and so on, then I think you really have to think very carefully.
But as an idea, sounds like a good idea, no? Get 20 minutes by car to Helsinki. You can work in Helsinki, live in Tallinn.
By train.
Oh, sorry, by train, yeah.
I think mentally, of course, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, it is
practically as well.
What?
Practically as well.
Yes, but who has the billions to put into this tunnel? That's the practical challenge.
We have one man in the audience who knows more about it, but I'm not gonna, call him out because he might not want to invest. Okay. But yeah, okay. But I mean, as an idea of collaborating more between Finland and Estonia, and also between those two cities, kind of would make sense, right? I mean, if we all, gain from it.
Well, as Swedes are the slowest one to initiate a project, and Finns come the second slowest one to initiate a project. It is quite surprising that Mr. Vesterbacka
with a Swedish gene pool in himself, right?
Okay. Came out with the idea and started to push it so aggressively. Then again, we have to remember that Estonia pushed very aggressively the concept of e-residence, and boasting about 10 million e-Estonians being before 2030 or something like that by the...
It might happen. We've got 12 years to go.
So we have one common factor there, giving big promises. Like both countries' ministries of transportation mentioned that there can be only one project. It must be unified at some point. It must be put together at some point. I believe that will happen. I believe that it simply depends on how much investment Mr. Vesterbacka can get to the project to start, so to say, the environmental studies need to be done. He doesn't obviously realize what kind of governmental, managemental, permission issues there are, how many court orders and arguments will be, and what's the effect on delays of those in the project. He plays it on the best case scenario all the time with his talks. Even his own co-partners have recently given some commentaries that, yeah, maybe we are a bit too optimistic, but let's not set the deadline to Christmas Eve on 2024. Let's hope that it's operating in the end of 2025, and so on. So this is slippering towards the 2030, which I think could already be possible, but it again, Before I moved to Tallinn, I was working in a PR consultancy in Finland that was planning to open up a sub-office in London to help out the Finnish IT companies to make their export into Europe. Then came 9/11. Okay, now we are in the same situation. Vesterbacka is getting money from China, from Dubai to buy this tunnel, and then comes Brexit. And everything stops. Could be in the hard Brexit scenario or no deal Brexit scenario.
I mean, neither end of the tunnel is in Britain.
But the effects of the world's economy will be a Black Monday.
I think we have had
Yes,
Black
but
Mondays
I
already.
think more interesting is that the ministers started to speak seriously about the tunnel before Vesterbacka had this great idea that actually, and it was already financed by European Union 2 years studies. So I think he entered the train when train was already moving. So we can see.
We can see the tunnel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. I mean, I like visions, though. I like a vision, you know. I mean, why not to have a one sort of Bay Area here and, you know, I mean, we are small. You know, if you look at Tallinn, Helsinki separately, both are like small towns by global standards.
And you think we have things in common, that we are the same?
I maybe not yet, but why not to move towards that, you know?
Think about the city government.
Yes,
How interesting will that be in English language? Because will be parts of Finnish Helsinki people who don't understand Estonian and vice versa.
And it will need to be run also in Swedish and probably Russian too, right?
Yeah, probably Russian too. Well,
But even without the tunnel, of course, the connections are already incredibly close and fast. I know I'm using them every week myself, and I feel like I live in Helsinki already, and this is quite possible. So the way it's already operating today, it's actually quite unique that you can have that close connections between two capitals. You can't think of too many countries in the world that would have that close relation.
that is true. Again, quick number, but I think it's about 10 million people travel every year between Helsinki and Tallinn. Was 10 million roughly about right? I think?
9 point something.
9 point something. So, and because of that, Helsinki, I think, is now the busiest passenger port in Europe at least, but possibly even world. Tallinn is also very, very popular. But let's give voice to audience. I saw some hands up before. Questions?
I'm sure the Chinese people and the tunnel builder want to speak, right?
Just please introduce briefly as well yourself and try to be as specific as possible.
Hello, I'm Marcel, I'm from Romania, and I have a question for Maya. As a journalist...
Kaja, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Kaja. As a journalist, from your experience, what would you say that was the biggest conflict between Estonia and Finland in the last years, if there was any?
Yes, this is a complicated question, but actually what I remember from last years, there have been conflicts, and one of the biggest, I think, most meaningful was the conflict about LNG terminal and gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia, because European Union promised to finance this big regional LNG terminal and the gas pipe. And Finland and Estonia both wanted to have the regional terminal. And it was because to be more independent from Russia, of course, that the European Union was ready to finance it. And Finland and Estonia, several years, it was 3 years that they were quarreling about this, who will get this. And in the end, Estonian Prime Minister promised that, okay, Finland can get it. And then went the time, and the Finnish gas company said that it isn't profitable. We doesn't want to have it. We don't need it. It's not economically profitable. And that means that at the moment there is no regional LNG terminal in the Finnish Gulf, nor in the Baltic Sea area. Okay, Finland and Estonia will get now the gas pipe. It's under construction, but without these LNG terminals, its importance is not the same. And it was really some kind of tension that was between the states, not in the personal level of people, but I don't think that Finnish and Estonian citizens even noticed very much of that conflict. But it was essential and not good for both. In the end, we don't see any LNG terminal here. But there have also been other smaller ones, several. I have listed some of them in that book in Estonian, but very many of them are just some kind of talks. But this was, I think, something that had more importance.
I think it's mostly between sort of institutions or politicians, sort of between people. There are no massive conflicts or whatever.
No, there are no massive conflicts neither between politicians. I haven't seen anything like that, but some small tensions and often somehow it depends somehow what Russia is doing or something, how Russia is behaving or somehow. But at the moment, no big conflicts. But this was a kind of conflict because it was in the interest of both countries to have that terminal. And this conflict, I think it didn't end well.
Yeah, questions? Got a question here at the front.
You were talking previously also about Sisu and like the will to go to military to defend your country. But wouldn't you say that in Estonia you also see in a different way that will to defend your country by, for instance, caring a lot about the language, about protecting the culture, about the national heritage? So you see still the will to protect the country and the culture and the values, but in a different way, just not military, but maybe like culturally.
You mean, so can you just specify the question? Do you mean what's the difference between Estonia and Finland in terms of protecting culture?
Yeah, but you're talking about that will to protect the country, that in Finland is stronger, and you see that by joining the military. But that I would say that maybe you in Estonia see it in different ways, that they are more, not so much about protecting the border and going to military, but more about protecting the culture against maybe, for instance, immigration. What's your view on that? So that you see Sisu in both countries similarly, just expressed in a different way, if I understand at least the meaning of the word correctly.
Well, there is one thing about maintaining and preserving your cultural heritage and yourself as a nation, as people, and another thing about your independence and physical threats against your physical perimeters. There has been talks, both in Finland and in Estonia, about the importance of the language itself. The teacher of the Finnish school in Estonia mentioned that Estonian youngsters can learn Finnish language, and that is true. If I remember right, it is available as the second foreign language, but you can't make the final exam because of the educational ministry in Finland does not accept the exams done in foreign country at the moment, and that's again a legislation thing.
And where is the will to protect the culture and the heritage, where is that bigger, in Finland or in Estonia? What would you say? And isn't that maybe then a form of Sisu?
I would say that it is in Finland, and you can see it by the way how Finns, for example, have quite witty self-irony in English language about the complicated Finnish language. We have the Facebook group and the Instagrams and of very Finnish problems, which is a humor site, which again is about Finnish culture, Finnish behavior, Finnish language. We don't have yet that kind of channel to project the Estonian culture or the Estonian values in the global context or in English language.
But you could very well argue the opposite as well if you consider that after 700 years of slavery, the culture and the language still exists and still strives.
Finland, before the 1917, has also had the influences from Swedes, from Russians. Even the Finnish language have words that are taken from the Swedish or Russian languages. So in that sense, the Finno-Ugric language family, so to say, is quite similar. The thing is simple, that because of the small amount of Estonian people, we need to remember that from 1.3 million Estonians, Estonian language as the mother language is only with approximately 800,000, I would say. 500,000 are the Russian-speaking Estonians. And there you can see it in all cultural aspects. You can see it all Eurobarometer studies. You can see it even in the PISA study results. That the results are lower in the Russian-speaking schools than in the Estonian-speaking schools. But you must, I would personally think that you must not build a cultural barrier between the two language groups.
We have a good solution in works. This new law that all schools will be Estonians, right?
It helps.
Not a law yet, but it's
not a law.
It's an initiative.
Proposed. But Kristi, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think we were moving now a bit, drifting to a different question. But first on this identity and culture, I think for both Estonians and Finns, the idea of your own language and your own specific cultural heritage as a core issue for what you are, I think it's very strong for both countries. And for me, it's quite impossible to say or to measure which one is stronger. It's just taking a bit different forms. But look at the Estonian tradition of song festivals, for example. It's something very specific. Okay, it historically actually comes from the German tradition of having this kind of festivals. So it's kind of coming from there. But then it has become a very important part of the Estonian identity, and it's being maintained. And that's just one example of how it matters. But
and immediately there was a small scandal that the working committee of the next year's song festival suggested that there could be one Russian language song within the program.
But that's again a different question of whether defending your own language and identity is about drawing a very clear, strict barrier between your own culture and others, or can it be more flexible with interacting and bringing in elements? And that's a bit of a different debate, but it doesn't mean that you give up defending your national culture. Actually, I refuse to see it in that way, that if we would allow one Russian language song at the song festival, it would mean that we would somehow be less serious about defending the Estonian language. I don't see it that way at all. But then also I wanted to say that it's not an either or, that do you defend the country militarily or do you defend the language and culture. I mean, as small nations located geographically, geopolitically where we are, we have to be able to do both in order to survive as nations. And that's something where, of course, Finland has a stronger tradition of also taking care of its own defense. And Estonia is smaller and it's not even able to do it alone in the same way. But what we see in the case of both countries, they are actually becoming more similar in getting very closely integrated with the bigger Western structures and relying on defense cooperation.
Could you perhaps relate it also to nationalism? As you said, like here they have like some parties like that which they might lack in Finland, as you mentioned, if I'm correct?
Parties, you mean political?
Political
Talking
parties.
about national parties.
Yeah, like Agri, which is more nationalistic and about protecting the culture, which have less.
We discussed that. Finland has had one many years ago called in Finnish.
Still, it still has.
Still has it.
It's still a
In
government.
English, True Finns, it's called.
Yes.
And they were even in a coalition government. And after that, what Tarmo actually mentioned before, they changed. They sort of became more normal and more mainstream.
No, the party
They
split,
split
and
it.
what is in the government
They
now is
split,
actually
yeah.
called the Blue Future, which is the more moderate wing, what was left of the Finns party. And the Finns party now is in opposition, the more radical part of the kind of original
But
Finns
Kaja,
party.
you wanted to add something before.
To the question before that about what about who is for whom is more important, the national culture or something like that. That Estonians are demonstrating more it. They are not ashamed having flags and having national customs and all kind of these things that Finns have been a long time not wanting to be labeled as nationalists. So. And Finland has this Finnish thing in the social media, but Estonia is mixing this all national tradition, this folk to everywhere. They have folk classic music, folk heavy, folk metal, all kind of national customs in what
folk events all around the year, which Finns don't have.
And in clothes, having mixing this to everywhere. But in Finland, I think Finnish people have been a little bit ashamed of not wanting to be like labeled as nationalists. It's different.
Is that a bad thing or a good thing? Because, for instance, in many European countries, they almost have an idea of a way with us, and all cultures in this country should be expressed the same way. And therefore, some other countries actually see Estonia as like too nationalistic or maybe even too racistic. What is your view on that?
No, this is a different history, as you see.
It's different, and every country is different. Obviously, the context is different. But any more questions from the audience? Yeah.
Give China a word.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure if I actually will be able to respond properly as a Chinese concerning the tunnel. But all I can say is that since China, there are lots of successful business right now, and they do have money. And infrastructure-wise, China really has experienced lots of transformations over the years, and they have accumulated a lot of this know-how for big, gigantic, massive infrastructure building. So it could just be that they want to compete in the international world in a smaller or medium-sized project. So not necessarily just with any political ulterior motives. And that also leads me to another question concerning about the how Finland and Estonia actually see China nowadays. When you talk about the relations between Estonia and Finland and Russia, you tend to get very emotional, but you forget one important fact, that what is also common among China, Estonia, and Finland is also that we have a common neighbor. Russia is also our neighbor. And simply because we're a big country doesn't mean that China has never suffered any aggressive moves from Russia. And actually, as early as 1930s and 1940s, we are this close to speak Russia or speak Japanese as our mother tongue instead of Chinese or Mandarin nowadays. So Tom is I fully understand that for a country of 5 million people or 1.3 million people, when you think of a country of 1.3 billion and soon will be 1.4 billion, then you think that nothing could go right there if they get rich. But then nowadays in the Western society, you advocate for the cultural diversity, for the language diversity, all kinds of diversities. Why can't you just also give chance to a political diversity? That we don't necessarily speak the same political language. I have lived in democratic part of the world for about 5.5 years. I see all the good things that could happen in a democratic society, but then I also see something that I don't think necessarily efficient or totally work towards the best benefit. Take Brexit as an example. You think that it's a democracy that referendum goes, everybody votes, and then what happened? And this sort of democracy seems to produce more politicians with calculations instead of leadership or vision. Sometimes when we give the trust to the massive great, then we think that, oh, let you decide your own fate. But we forget one thing, that most of the people don't look beyond their nose tip. So what is exactly good for a country or for a nation? Who knows?
Well, thank you for your input. Anyone wants to comment on that?
We have seen one success story in Finland related to China. Finnair would not be as gigantic air carrier as it is. Finland would not have the Far East connections without a network and connections to China. And that's both sides. Finns traveling to do business there, Chinese tourists coming to Lapland, coming to Helsinki, and from Helsinki also to Tallinn. There has been criticism, quite strong criticism recently in Estonian media that why does Estonian Tourism Board try to get Chinese and Japanese tourists to come to Estonia, because the volume, the amount of people is thousands or tens of thousands, whereas there were, I don't remember how many millions of 1.7 million nights spent by Finns in Estonian hotels. If we, and what we have seen is that the Finns have not traveled to Estonia anymore so often. The amount of visitors have gone down approximately 10%. That 10% means 900 million euros of not earned incomes to Estonian society and to Estonian government. It doesn't help much to bring more 15,000 Chinese to Estonia, but it is a gateway. And that is what Mr. Westerbacka has a very good pointed, that we have the Chinese connections from British Airways, from KLM, from all the major carriers, but the location of Helsinki airport and the connection time, flight time to the Far East is the shortest one, and that's why the Helsinki airport is making big developments and investments.
Actually, I did want to get to the point as well, discussing the tourism. But when you say Helsinki has got the shortest distance to Beijing, you're wrong. Actually, Tallinn has got the closest. And that's I was surprised too, but I was recently told that by someone who works in China that Tallinn is slightly, I think it was 1 or 2 kilometers closer to Beijing than Helsinki, and that's a good and indeed why Estonia has not really gained much from it. That he actually criticized. He was Estonian diplomat working in Beijing. He said, they proposed to Enterprise Estonia as well. Direct flights between Beijing and Tallinn, organize that. You mentioned Finnair.
We might soon have them, but the operator will be Air Baltic.
Well, Air Baltic, yes, or Finnair, perhaps. But yes, indeed, Finland obviously has gained a lot from tourism from China, and Estonia, thanks to Finnair, because they come one day and so forth. But yeah, but anyone want to add anything to what our guest from China said before? Christy, you wanted to add something to that, or
to the political side?
You already made it. Obviously, you know.
Well, if I just take the discussion now to more like high politics level. Of course, when we look at business opportunities and tourism and other types of like gains to be made from having closer connections with China, certainly there is a potential, and here it's probably a good idea also for Estonia and Finland to sometimes think together about attracting tourists, for example. But then the bigger game in global politics, I have to say it's not that rosy nowadays. I mean, the direction of where global politics is moving, and as small nations we also have to be very aware of that it's unfortunate, but the tensions between major powers are increasing, and also when we think about what are the, let's say, the conditions and terms of how trade is happening between major powers on blocks, there the conditions, the terms of free trade are defined at the European Union level, and that is the place then where we have to be able to influence the decisions. And then there are big issues also between the Chinese and European Union relations about how to ensure that there is actually a level playing field, that the European Western economies have the tradition of being very open, but the Chinese economy is actually not open in the same way, and the solutions there on what are the conditions, how does the world economy function. These are the kind of higher level games where we as Estonians or Finns, we are not able to change these terms, but there we actually have to work through the European Union.
Tarmo, you wanted to add?
I mean, on a classical capitalistic level, of course, money doesn't smell, right? So if there is a few billion of Chinese money coming to build the tunnel which will connect us closer to the Finns, I mean, what could be wrong? On the other side, of course, we have cases like Chinese telecom companies building their networks in Western Europe to try to spy us, right? So, kind of two sides of the same coin.
Sure, obviously, yeah, concern here, but talking about tourism, apparently Pärnu, the Estonian town of Pärnu, which is the nice resort town in the south of Estonia, is the second most popular destination for retired Finnish people, Finns. I don't have enough information about, I mean, is it popular destination for short time or whatever, but I mean, what do you think Finns see in Estonia in terms of, I mean, retired Finns? I mean, that's maybe a big business opportunity for Estonia here.
But I think Pärnu has really used that business opportunity to extreme already.
You meaning spas and all that? Yeah.
Spas and the short-term rentals and all kind of.
But that brings us to the question of reputation as well, which I wanted to discuss. You know, the reputation of Estonia in Finland. Obviously that, and also you mentioned that briefly at the beginning, because the numbers show that the number of Finnish tourists has actually decreased. It's gone down a little bit. Why do you think that, Timo? Is it because, I mean, there was a question of the customer service, but is it also because Estonia has become more expensive?
Beer price.
Exactly.
Beer price. I mean, we will be soon doing beer buying trips into Finland. Come on.
But obviously we are becoming a more wealthy country, and it means also more expensive. But how you overcome that?
It's not about wealth. Compare the average salary in two countries. It's not about wealth. It's about taxation.
What would you change here then?
I mean, I don't mind with the current situation. I mean, I'm not the hotel entrepreneur or don't run the tourism business based on the kind of the cheap end of the Finnish tourist flow. So I'm not too worried about it. And being an alcohol entrepreneur, I don't mind either.
What about reputation of Estonians in Finland? I mean, you worked there for many years. about 52,000 Estonians live in Finland, and about 100,000 work there. Many just during the week and then come back to over weekends. It's a large number. I don't know how many Finns are working in Estonia, but couple of thousand perhaps.
Probably more.
It depends on statistics, and from
So
3,000 to 8,000, something in between.
So clearly, obviously, massive number of Estonians in Finland, but still very small number of Finns here. But talking about the reputation of Estonians in Finland, I mean, you worked in communication. You've also read Finnish media. Would you say how has it changed over the years? Has the reputation improved? Obviously, at the beginning, maybe many Estonians were still sort of looked down upon and sort of kind of. Is it improving?
I think it has changed a lot. I think the big flow of the kind of low-end construction workers has had a really bad effect. I think in the early 90s it was more like at least to some extent, some kind of the relative nation, the sukulaiskansa, the little brother, which was in a way positive, even though it might have been diminishing. But I think I think in the younger generation, you don't really see any problems. But at the same time, for the younger generation, often Finland is not the connection point to the world, or it rarely is, right? And the question is that how those two countries could work closer together, and that's kind of slipping away, because as you were earlier saying, if you want to build a business in Estonia, you don't think of Finland. Why on earth? And if you think we have like the two closest capitals on earth, probably, or the best connected capitals on earth, it's really weird that you don't think of Finland.
Sure.
And I don't know, is there any good solutions how this could be improved? I mean, maybe tunnel will solve it miraculously. Probably not.
I am not so pessimistic like you, because I think that in opposite, that the Estonian constructors have hired the reputation of Estonians. They have cleared it actually, or the workers in Estonian workers have somehow cleared the reputation of those 90s Estonians, when it was a shock.
Criminals.
Yes, when the borders were opened and there were shock about the new situation and all kind of criminality. There was problems, social problems, and now when there are really about 100,000 Estonians working, doing the same work, normal work, and I think they have somehow cleared the reputation of Estonians. People know them, and they are part of the Finnish community, and Finland knows that Finland has profited of the situation. The Finnish people know that in countryside there wouldn't be doctors without the Estonians. In Helsinki area there wouldn't be so much construction without Estonians. The buses wouldn't run without Estonians, and I think that's. People are very conscious of that at the moment, and those.
So it's a bit like black people in some U.S. towns, right?
No, absolutely not. Because if there hadn't been the Estonians, the Finns would have imported Polish construction workers, or Latvians, or Lithuanians, or because of the construction business is. Changing to be more international, and you get the workmen to travel.
Don't quote me supporting Latvians, but what's wrong with Latvians?
But in that sense, Kaja was absolutely right. The perception in Finnish media it's not as much as about whether it's positive or negative. I would say that it's also about quantity. The amount news stories covering all aspects of life, culture, sports, industry, travel, tourism, lifestyle, the stories that Finnish papers are writing about Estonia, thanks to the freelance editors living in Estonia, thanks to cooperation between publishing houses, and so on, it's gone wider. So Finns are no more knowledgeable about Estonian everyday life now than it was still 3 to 5 years ago. And thank you for mentioning the Independence Day of Finland, but I would like to remind that the Finnish Language Institute, or what was it, gave an award this year to all the Finnish newspapers who changed their name into Estonian on the Estonian Independence Day. So Helsingin Sanomat was Helsingin Sõnumit. The maaseudun tulevaisuus, future of the rural areas, was mis oli, maaelu tulevik. So Finns have also noticed the 100th anniversary of Estonia.
Thank you. But we've got a question from the audience.
Okay.
Yeah?
Hello. Hi. How does team work? Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm Finn. I'm living here. My name is Juhana Kari. And I have a few questions. So, first...
Just try to speak to the microphone.
Yeah, sorry. So about about the values, when you talked before about the values and how it's differ from, like compared to Estonia and Finland, like example, sexual minorities or maybe foreigners, whatever. And so example, when you think EKRE will have a bisexual example or homosexual candidate or politician like in Finland, true Finns have now?
I think some of them seem to be, they are
like
at least...
openly?
They are, they are not openly, but based on the talks, they're clearly, in Finnish, kaappi homoja.
Yeah. But this, in Finland we have one who is openly and took part to Pride. It's openly bisexual. And it's now like hardline true Finn. So this is like a Western European trend. You are true, like a hardline far right, but still like can be openly gay or whatever. This is like, and this is not like here in Estonia. I see EKRE is like this EKRE conversos are very anti-gay or whatever. So this EKRE is not yet up to date like Western European trends.
EKRE is not, and it will not become in nearest future either. And they had, they managed to attract one very famous singer in Estonia for a short time, Siiri Sisask, well, Estonians would know. And she, I think she lasted like 1 or 2 days. And the reason was that she said she is, supports EKRE in terms of the, protecting the national identity, etc. But she said that she also supports the right of gay couples to adopt children, for example. And immediately there was a huge backlash against her from EKRE members, sort of crown, sort of root members, and she left the party within 2 days. So it's like really hard line in terms of liberal and also in terms of social tolerance.
So then, how long do you think that this in Estonia will be more like tolerant, like some level like Finland? Maybe Finland was behind of Sweden, but maybe now it's about the same level like tolerance with the Sweden, at least by law. Like now we have, just recently we got law, which Sweden had a lot more before than us. So we have always been behind of other Nordic countries in this sense. So maybe 20 years, like Finland has been 20 years gap.
No, 20 years is too short time, because when I came to Estonia 2004, one of the first newspaper articles that I read in Postimees was an opinion article about the Estonian customer service level. And it was a good example of a customer service person working in the Tallinn airport, saying some bad things for the customer who has lost her luggage or something like that. And the official reply to her complaint was that the customer is always wrong unless he or she can prove that she's right. And the customer service person was in mid-40s at that point. So he or she is a mother or father of a teenager who gets into the work or has now already got to work. But we know that we need 2 generations to make this kind of tolerance to change the real values of individuals, because you still have the influence of your grandfather, of your grandmother, and that very often skips 1 generation. So you have even closer relationship with your grandfather than your father. And that means that the change of attitude takes 2 generations. So 35 to 40 years.
Any more questions?
Yeah, still I have. Then about this Marrakesh agreement, it's a bit odd. Why it's so big thing in Estonia? Because in Finland it's not, at least by the government level, it's not big thing in Finland. And there's no, I think there's not any really big major demonstration against the Marrakesh agreement, because it's not by any government, nothing. It's just like a kind of guidelines. And why it's so big thing? And this is funny. I've had to add my colleague from Estonian colleague, my work. He was talking about Tarand and Soros, and it sounds like what? This like from Hungary, like some Orban country. So this is because Hungary they a lot speak about Soros and Western capitalists, which slaves Hungarians, and he's told that his brother will go against demonstrate. So what is this fear of immigration? Who wants to come here? Because
touché. Who wants to come to Estonia when we know that we don't have the social welfare system like Finland does?
Yeah, nobody wants.
Just look around you in the room, right? But the answer to your actual question, it's 4 months to elections.
Yeah.
And Isamaa has lost the right-wing support to EKRE. They had to make a fuss about it. That's the only way they can actually survive through the elections.
Yeah.
That's the short answer.
And in many other countries where this UN migration compact has been opposed, it has very little to do with the actual content or aims of the migration compact, but it's rather that certain type of parties, kind of radical right-wing parties, have seen this as an opportunity for them to gain popularity, to gain visibility, because migration is such a politicized issue, and then deliberately kind of misinterpreting and kind of claiming that it is something much bigger and more important than it actually is. They have actually been successful in having more support and visibility.
Yeah, and you did you have another one?
Yeah, I was still. And what about you think about average Estonian thinks that Finland doesn't belong to NATO and have this kind of a good relationship with the Soviet Union? It's hard to understand. And then, many Finns say that, or politicians say quite clearly that we won't defend Estonia because it's enough us to defend ourselves. We can help somehow, but really military we cannot do it. It's not realistic way. So what is like Estonia's average, they don't understand this, or it's hard to understand this kind of a attitude?
Well, Kristi, I think already spoke about it quite a bit, but you want to comment on that again?
Well, maybe shortly, because I think this is one of the most debated issues, at least in political field between Estonia and Finland, that when Estonians talk about Finnish foreign policy, they always raise 2 things. One is Russia and the other thing is NATO, and always expressing this hope that Finland would join NATO. And it's of course very easy to see why it would be in Estonia's interest. But I would say this division of NATO membership, non-NATO membership, it's interestingly becoming practically less relevant, with Finland and Sweden becoming closer and closer and kind of having this very special status as very close NATO partners. So it's no longer that big of an issue.
I have one question still.
Okay.
Okay.
Last one.
Last one. Okay. So well, it's actually related to these values. But then, it's political correctness. So the question is that for me was strange because I saw some time ago tabloid, and it was something like in English it was direct translation was something like Negro stabbed some Estonian in Helsinki or something like that. I don't have the picture now, but it's from an old phone. I took the photo because it's so old, and it's term Negro, neger. So in Finland, this is not approved. Like it's not any accident to say neger. It was in the 70s still, or 1980s. But and then my Estonians say that it's okay word. Neger is okay word. It's no racist in Estonia. So is it okay word in Estonia? And
well, I can quickly answer that. It's been ongoing discussion here, and I think again during the Soviet occupation that word was largely used, and it's still officially in Estonian õigekeelsus sõnaraamat. So basically, the official book that says what word is officially acceptable. But there's an ongoing discussion in the Estonian society about the word, and probably younger people increasingly do not want to use that word. So am I right here? Is that, yeah. So I think that answers that question. So give another 5-10 years, probably that will change in Estonia too. The word usage of that word. But there was another question here at the front. Oh yeah, okay, there as well.
Yes, my question, Abdul Turia from the UK. My question is about tourism, because you didn't really make a big deal out of the fall of Finnish tourists to Estonia. And there are a lot of businesses in Estonia that depend on Finnish tourists, right? And that could become a bigger problem in the ongoing years. And the government, with all respect to them, or at least certain parts of the government, the Social Democrats, are very keen on pushing these taxes on alcohol, which, if you speak to people in the industry, they say are destroying the alcohol industry in Estonia, which is one of our few homegrown industries. So I'd want to ask the panelists what they think of that. What is their opinion, or how to bring the tourists back to Estonia, because Tallinn does depend on these tourists.
So basically asking why are they taxing the alcohol so harshly?
I can take the alcohol industry point of view. You can take the tourism, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Basically, we make super premium handcraft gin. For us, the alcohol tax has no meaning whatsoever. It increased by 20 cents. In our product price, it's like 0.05%. It has no meaning for us. It has a huge meaning for the alcohol industry, which does the cheapest end of the scale. If you're trying to sell a €7 vodka, out of that €7 vodka, 5.5 euros is excise duty, 1.4 euros is the VAT, and the rest of the 6 cents will be split by the retailer, the wholesaler, the producer, the bottle maker, the label maker, and so on. So I think the distortion is, the alcohol industry last year in Estonia crashed. I think the overall market dropped like 20% or 25%. But the problem is really in the low end. And a lot of that 20% just moved across the border to Latvia. So I think the Estonian total alcohol consumption changed very little. I don't know how they actually count Finns here. What's the Finnish role in the Estonian alcohol numbers? They are biased, so they would be part of that 20% drop in the alcohol industry sales, but at the same time, Finns are also traveling to Latvia increasingly to pick up their alcohol. And as said, we will be traveling to Finland to buy our alcohol soon.
You wish.
Hey, it was in the news last week.
Yeah, but that was the same kind of, there is the lie, the huge lie, and the statistics. But
more serious issues, tourism. I think we can...
The the deputy mayor of Tallinn even gave a commentary in one media recently that he doesn't understand why does a pint of beer cost €9 in the old town square. That he can't afford to go to have a dinner with his family in the center restaurants.
It's called greed. It's called the greed of the Estonian.
It's called the greed, but what's the reason behind that? That is what's
one reason is the rent of Tallinn city, who is asking. I read about €70 per square meter in that area. That's so the major is blaming also himself about the prices, but about the tourism, the alcohol which Finnish tourists had taken from Estonia to Finland, it was dropping already before the
latest tax increase.
Tax increase, because Finns, those the huge amount of Finns, they came from other reasons, but they also bought alcohol when they came here, and now it's only about 5% of those taking alcohol from Latvia, but they take these huge amounts. They are those who are taking the alcohol for the high house or the selling or the village or town or something. But most of the Finns don't go even to Latvia because of the alcohol.
So this is again, but it sort of comes down to reputation again. It's sort of that's we've been talking about the Estonian reputation in Finland and in Estonia. In Estonian media, still, sort of Finnish reputation is as sort of kind of vodka tourist. Sometimes still, or do you think it has changed? That it's not so one-sided anymore. That we. That's how Estonian media used to portray, Finnish tourists and sort of kind of.
Yes, but it's also the lobby of those big companies, beer companies, and I don't think that Finns will be back if it would be lower. At the moment, for example, the long drink is half the price of what is in Finland. Right. The alcohol is still much cheaper here than in Finland.
But one more question from audience.
One more question on the same issue. Does the panel think that the tourism tax, which is being proposed by the local government, is a good idea? This is like a tax, a bed night tax, right?
Yeah. It's another method that they try to patch up their budget, which is blown up because of lots of things done wrongly. They did try to have the the tax for all the shop owners in Tallinn. Trade tax or something like that in Tallinn, which was also like 1% or something like that. It doesn't bring that much income, I would say.
The question is more like how to make the Finns travel. I think that's the biggest dilemma. Not what we do with them.
Let me say the Finns actually travel a lot also to Sweden, and I don't think it would be like the future dream of Estonia to be a country where people want to travel because of cheap alcohol. I think when we look further ahead, we really have to think of developing other interesting things to do and see in Estonia, and I think the change has started. When I think of my Finnish friends, why they come to Estonia, they are actually interested in the country, not in the alcohol.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are, so to say, packaging the services. The director of the Estonian Opera House recently mentioned in an interview that the ship companies, meaning Tallinn and Viking Line, or the travel agencies, they don't sell anymore for some reason. They dropped out the packages which included the ferry tickets, the accommodation, and the theater tickets, or a concert ticket, or ticket to some TV tower or whatever. Selling those. Instead of that, I have people, acquaintances who work in the Tallinn call center, and they organize all the time all kind of sales campaigns to the telephone salesperson, or that try to sell this and that additional service to the clients. And it really stresses the people out, because they feel that they are pressed to sell. And it's again because of the greed.
But okay, the tourism deserves a separate discussion. I'm sure there's many things. But okay, the gentleman here, last question, very briefly, because you waited a long time.
I kind of wanted to come back on the point we made here about the Marrakesh Pact, but I think actually many parties make good points about it, because like also I'm from the Netherlands, we saw there that Urgenda, which is about environmentalism, they went to the judge with a similar signed thing, which wasn't really a law, and they said, yeah, but based on that this is signed, the government is not doing enough. And then the judge gave them right. They said, you're right, the government has to do more, and they're now obligated to do that. So these non-binding things can still become binding, and some parties raise very important questions about it. The Belgian government is about to fall, probably going to fall over this topic. Like, it looks really from one side, acknowledging only the good side of immigration, and then saying like it actually promotes that people go illegal after they've done trying to get residencyship. And furthermore, it's also propaganda in some way, because media is obligated kind of to tell positively about immigration, and if they don't do, then the idea is kind of to cut subsidizement from that. That's kind of what we see standing in the Marrakesh Pact. And it's not a law, but it can still be used that way in the total field of law. Or am I seeing something wrong here? Because I see a gentleman
fine, but
you live in the Western world. There are no obligations in media to write about anything. This is one of the biggest fake news.
The Marrakesh Pact, I actually read it. It says something that we want to encourage.
Most of the media work as free media these days.
Yeah, but there is
she works for the
especially at government media.
No, government media, yes. That Linnaleht in Estonia and so on. Yes, that's not what we are talking about.
Mainstream media does not get that kind of substitutes.
No, they don't. Yeah, in Estonia, most of the media is privately held, actually, apart from the public broadcaster, which is but I mean, they have editorially they are independent. And so I work in the media, so I mean, and we actually talk about it. We all do. So it's, I think definitely completely 100% say that, you know, any sort of conspiracy theory about Soros, and it's so laughable that we don't even respond to that anymore. It's just ridiculously laughable, you know, all this Soros rubbish, you know, that Soros is fine. So. But that's another discussion, really. You know, obviously the fake news and the immigration itself is another topic, and we don't have time for this. I just want to briefly finish with positive note. Maybe if you can just briefly say how you imagine the relations between Finland and Estonia, or the people between two nations in, say, you know, 10 years' time, 10, 15 years' time. I like visions, so maybe. Who wants to start?
Lots and lots of Finns will start learning Estonian language.
No.
Just one very concrete thing. I think it would be nice to have a common public transportation system, so that you would move between Helsinki and Tallinn. You could use the same smart card to buy your ticket, or even have a monthly card. It's not actually that difficult to do.
Yeah, and in 10 years, Finns can travel by train through Tallinn to Central Europe.
Nice. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Tarmo, Kaja, Timo, and Kristi, and thank you. We will return in January. Just quickly, also want to thank our sponsors, Telliskivi Creative City and Estonian World. If you don't know Estonian World, then it's estonianworld.com, English language online magazine about Estonians. And my name is Silver Tamber, and thank you for coming, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.